I actually can't share my screen if you could enable me.
Oh yeah, I think you have to put you as like a co-host or something. Hold on.
Okay. Okay, that should be. Okay. Okay, do you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, sounds good. Okay, hi. So my name is Nuttida. Thank you for having me. I am a neuroscience postdoctoral research fellow in the computational neurobiology lab at the Salk Institute in San Diego, and I'm also working jointly with the neuroscience group at the Army Research Lab for the past couple of years. Before presenting my work on probabilistic decision making or decision making under uncertainty, I would like to spend the first few minutes talking about the importance of diversity and mentorship in science and higher education. So specifically, I will be talking about my background and how the mentorship that I have received throughout middle school, high school, college, and also grad school has shaped my scientific identity. So to tell you a little bit about myself, so I was born and raised in a very small town in Thailand. So it's highlighted in in the red as a red dot here. So to the north of Thailand, and formal science education or higher education was kind of a privilege in my town, right? So not everybody gets to go to high school or college. So in fact, I actually learned most of middle school and elementary school and middle school math and science classes or lessons from many outreach programs that were run by many groups of college students, and both from Thailand and also from international organizations, right? Like from the States, for example. And so doing science experiments at school, like hands-on experiments were out of question, right? Like there was not enough resources yeah, we just did not have access to all the equipment, right? So right, and so without college degree, actually my parents decided that the three of us, right, my parents and me, that we would buy some textbooks and we would actually try to do some of the simple experiments at home. And that's what we did, exactly, right? So we bought a lot of like used textbooks, and we were going through all these different pictures of people, like creating experiments at home. And these are some of examples. So the pictures I have on the bottom here are actually from the outreach programs that I was a part of, that I was actually helping to run when I was a high school student, right? So that's me in the third picture, but all these experiments were actually recreated. These were the experiments that I actually, had tried with my parents when I was in middle school myself, right? So then when I got to high school, I went back to all these outreach programs and I recreated these experiments for other students, right? So right, so some of the experiments were, about how plants could make food and survive and things like that, right? So like photosynthesis, and we also did some refraction experiment, with different objects, different matters, and then we also look at like crystallization and some other experiments as well. So when I was 14, right, so that was actually my first year of high school, or actually my last year of middle school. My parents and I, right, we came across this textbook. So I found a picture on the internet here. So this is the textbook that we found from a bookstore, and it's called Fundamental Neuroscience by Dr. Larry Squire and others. So this was, nothing like anything we had read before. And for one, this was in English, right? Like every other book was in the language that we actually could understand. But for this one, it was in English, and, it had a lot of cool pictures of the brain. And up to that point, I had not seen any picture of the brain before, right? So all my experiments, or what I had learned in science, was about like plants or like water or light, right? So we were really excited, and we were, hoping to learn more about the brain, but it was in English, and I couldn't understand it, right? So I was really definitely curious to learn more, and in fact, I actually spent the next couple of months, right, searching for some more neuroscience books that were written in the language that I could understand. But I had no luck. That was the only textbook that I could really find in my town, right, from this bookstore, and it's in English, so I couldn't understand it. So I put that in my room. I looked at the pictures from time to time, but then I thought to myself, one day I would really like to understand what's being written in here, right? So that was actually when I decided to reach out to other kind of outreach organizations, and talk to people from the States, right, asking about neuroscience, or the study of the brain, essentially. And what I gathered was that I would really need to first learn English, right, because all the new research it's going to be written in English, right? So what I did then, so I decided that I should first try to learn English, and then try to maybe go to the States to study neuroscience, because that's where all the new findings come from. And so, yep, that's exactly what I did. So I took some English lessons, and in high school. So I actually went to high school in Bangkok. I got a scholarship, and I went to high school, like a real high school, right? And then I got to take some English lessons, and I met people from the States, right, who came to do outreach programs in Thailand, who were telling me a little bit about college education and higher education in the States. And I studied English for a couple of years, and then I applied to university and colleges in the States. So at the end of my high school, right, essentially I learned a lot of science and I guess math lessons from all these different kind of camps, right, and outreach programs. And so I applied to college, and I came to Middlebury. So Middlebury College is in Vermont, and it's a liberal art school, right? So what that means is that it's really all the students, right, have to take a lot of different diverse classes, and it's very teaching heavy, right? So a really big component of education at Middlebury College was taking a lot of classes, reading a lot of textbooks, having a lot of discussion with different people. And I thought that was really helpful for me, right? First, for actually improving my English and being able to kind of make arguments and understand, carry conversation with people. So that was really helpful. But it's also very different, right? Because I came from, kind of taking classes here and there, right? Not a continuous curriculum throughout the year, right? From my background. So that was, eye-opening. That was very interesting for me to see. But also I had a really hard time, right, understanding a lot of things. But so I pull a lot of all-nighters just to kind of keep up with the reading assignments, right? But yeah, so I kind of questioned, during the first year of college, whether I could actually make it through grad school or to study neuroscience, right? So I majored in neuroscience and math in college, right? But then I also realized that if I want to, start doing research, then I should go to grad school and learn about all these different techniques, right, that you can use to study about the brain. But then, it's hard, right? And so throughout college, I had a lot of people classmates and also TAs, right, teaching assistants, and also professors who gave me a lot of guidance, right, and really value my input or perspectives, right, that I have given my background that's slightly different from everybody else. So I want to highlight some of kind of the type of mentorship, right, and kind of teamwork and efforts that increase kind of diversity in higher education and in science that I think helped me a lot. And I also want to encourage, right, everyone to take part in any efforts that you can. So I took several neuroscience classes with Professor Arndt, and also Professor Root. And I, cannot count the number of hours they both spent during their office hours, right, to re-explain like the simplest, the most basic concepts, right, that I had missed in class, right, because it was a lot, and I had to keep up with the reading, right, and everything was new to me. And throughout college, right, it was essentially these two professors, right, who reminded me like day in and day out that I can do it if I kind of keep trying, and that one day I can make it to grad school, right, and I can actually do research in neuroscience. And then I actually kept at it, right. I took more classes in neuroscience. I started working or volunteering in different biology, psychology, and neuroscience labs here and there at Middlebury, but also in summer I reach out, right, to bigger or more like research universities, right, where they actually have a lot of different labs being run in the summer that are looking for volunteers, right. And so during my sophomore year, I actually emailed over like 50 labs, right, across the country, asking if I could, if there's anything at all that I could do over the summer in their labs. And having zero experience, right, like zero real research experience, I was surprised to actually receive like the kindest response from Professor Syrensis from UC San Diego, actually. So John, was very nice. He sent me a very nice email, and he was essentially saying, like, yeah, like great, we will be running some experiment in the summer. So yeah, feel free to join the lab in the summer and learn from the grad students and the postdoc researchers in the lab, and so I did come to UC San Diego that summer as a sophomore, knowing nothing about research or the brain. And John and everyone in the lab were very understanding, very kind. They went above and beyond, right, to explain complex concepts and data in very simple, using very simple language to make sure a sophomore like me would feel included in any lab or project meetings, right. John also gave me an opportunity to actually co-present a poster of findings, right, of scientific findings at my very first neuroscience conference. And with his advice and guidance that extended years after my internship that summer, I joined a neuroscience graduate program at UC San Diego. So I came back. It was a great place. So I decided to apply, and I was very happy to get into the graduate program here. And so at UCSD, I was co-advised by John and Larry, right? And if you remember, Larry Squires is actually the author of my very first neuroscience textbook. So I was very happy to actually, meet him and get to work with him for a few years. So throughout grad school, I was also fortunate enough to receive mentorship from many other amazing mentors, right, through graduate fellowship and collaborations. I'm also very grateful for each and every one of my lab mates who were always very, very kind and patient and supportive. And I think the point that I want to convey here is that mentorship or teamwork is very important, and mentorship is important, right? But mentorship doesn't always have to come from like your teachers, your professors, right? It can also come from your friends, right? Or somebody who so like if you're working. So when I was a grad student, I worked a lot with high school students and also undergraduate students, right? And I feel like sometimes, or a lot of times actually, I learned a lot from them as well, right? So like mentorship doesn't have to come from somebody who who's a lot, I guess, older than you, who seems to know more than you, right? Like everybody has different backgrounds, right, and experience. And I think mentorship, it's a lot more about sharing the diverse perspectives, right, on the same topic. And so I guess my point with this slide, right, is to show that I actually equally, right, like I equally enjoy learning from my lab mates as well, and everybody was amazing, and they grow, like they share a lot of different perspectives that really help me grow and become like a scientist, right? So I really value that experience, right? And together these experiences throughout, all these different outreach programs, through middle school, high school, and also liberal art education, and also my research experience at UC San Diego, all of this, right, have shaped my thinking and my scientific identity, right? So, so far, right, I hope I have convinced you that if it wasn't for the guidance and support, mentorship from my mentors and my lab mates, right, I probably wouldn't even think grad school was a possibility, right, for me, given my background. And whether you're, middle school student, high school student, undergraduate student, grad student, postdoc, faculty, whoever, right, there are always things that you can do to contribute to this mentoring efforts, right? As I mentioned before, and you can, like, anyone can be a mentor, right? Like, you can teach your friend and your friend can teach you. You can learn from, everybody, right? And you can start, you can also start small, right? So mentoring can range from spending, the extra 5 to 10 minutes, right, re-explaining certain concepts or some homework assignment to your friends or to other, like, classmates, right? Or it could also be a bigger effort, like mentoring students through a summer research program. And when possible, right, as I mentioned before, there's always things that you can do, right, that you can that the other people can learn from you. And so when possible, I think it's really important that each of us, right, considers investing a little bit of time in learning from others, but also contributing to, like, mentoring other people as well. And also, I think it's really important to consider, like, investing time and energy in helping people who have no kind of research experience, right? Because I was there. Like, if John, did not give me the opportunity, I wouldn't be here today, right? So I think it's really important to, like, be the change in somebody's life, right? Like, to start small and you can really help a lot of people, right? And right, and I just want, so this is some of the, so there are a lot of programs set up to help you do this, to actually let you be a mentor, but also give you opportunity to learn from other people as well, right? So you can join the program as a mentee as well. And for example, there's this summer training academy for research success, or STARS program, at UCSD. So for this program, it's a big research community program that high school students can apply to, right? And what this program does is to match each high school student in the program with a lab. So it could be like it doesn't have to be neuroscience, right? So it can be some other, it could be astronomy lab, or it can be, physics lab, right? Based on the expressed interest, essentially, right? So for, like, through this program, it allows, high school students and also undergraduate students and graduate students kind of work together as a team for 8 weeks on a research project. And at the end of it, right, you kind of have, you form this network of like teamwork and mentorship that kind of lasts for a long time, right? So I have participated in this program, and I encourage anybody who's interested in higher education and, like, research, right, to look out for programs like this. So I know that a lot of schools, a lot of programs offer similar efforts, and I think it's great. And yeah, and there's also other programs like this new program at UCSD. It's called Colors of the Brain, and essentially it's a similar summer research program that is supposed to be encouraging kind of people who have not had much experience with research. And it's a 10-week summer research program that you will get to work closely with, like, faculty and also graduate students in a lab. Right. So so now, right, so I hope I have convinced you that it's really important to advance science, right? It's really important that we work together, right? And we share diverse perspectives. And no matter who you are, there are always things that you can do to contribute to these efforts. And so now I will spend, the next few minutes talking about my my research, or what I have been working on for the past few years. So I am really interested in the question of, how is it that the brain, or our brain, can keep up with all this complex sensory information that you get, like as you navigate environment, like day to day, right? You get so much information coming in, right, through your eyes, your ears, right, your skin, right? So how is it that, this organ of yours could kind of keep up with everything, right? And let you, like, allow you to make decisions, to generate optimal actions in different scenarios, right? And a really big component of that is how the brain kind of takes in all this information, maybe filters out, right, what it doesn't need for certain tasks, and then kind of transforms that information into an optimal decision, right? And essentially to decide what to do in a given scenario. And there are a lot of ways that we can study this, right? We can, and we can do that in humans, we can do that in other model organisms like rodents or monkeys as well, right? And we can also, try to simulate or model, right, this process using different computational models, and even, like deep learning models, for example, right? And here I just want to give kind of an overview of different techniques that I have tried, right, to get at the question of how the brain can give rise to decision making, especially, right, under uncertainty, especially when the sensory information is probabilistic. And right, so why is this important, right? So, as I was saying before, sensory environment is so complex, and if you're imagining, you're hiking in Torrey Pines, right? So this is right next to my lab. It's very pretty, right? But there are a lot of things that could be happening, right? And this is, taken during the day, right? So it's sky's very clear. You can see everything clearly, right? But there are cars coming, there are people walking past you and things like that, right? So there are a lot of information. But when it gets darker, then your brain actually has to work even harder, right? To actually try to see where you're going, and maybe like looking out for, maybe like mysterious animals. So maybe, as you're walking back to your car after the end of the hike, you run into this animal. And now you're wondering, your brain's wondering, what do we need to do? Do we need to like just keep walking because it's fine? It's just, a house cat or dog, a house dog, or is it a coyote, for example, right? Like, so you can see that when, like a lot of times, right, the brain needs to make a fast decision that is optimal, right? And, when the sensory information is very limited, right, like when it's dark, or when you can't see very well, then some knowledge about what we have experienced in the past in the same scenario or in the same context could be really helpful, right? So in this case, you might be thinking, how likely is it that I would run into a coyote, right, at Torrey Pines, like on this hiking trail? How likely is it that I would actually see a coyote, right? So that knowledge about how the likelihood of something to happen, like of this scenario to be happening in a given context, is really helpful. And in fact, right, our brain relies on that information a lot to make quick and also accurate judgment or decision making, right? And so it's really important that the brain knows how to do this, right? It knows how to draw on, the brain knows how to draw from prior information or prior knowledge about prior information of the environment, right? So like in this case, I would probably think that it's not likely that I would be seeing coyote on this hiking trail. So maybe, I would kind of keep walking, but, I would just kind of be aware of my surrounding, right? But I would not just like run the other way, right? Given that it's probably not a coyote, right? So that's why it's kind of important to study decision making under uncertainty or right. So probabilistic decision making. And but how would we study that in a lab environment, right? So one way of doing that is to vary the amount of information being presented to the subjects. In this case, where we're going to be talking about human participants, right, or human subjects. So how do we study probabilistic decision making, right? So one way of doing that is we can simulate environment where when subjects come in to the lab, right? We usually sit them in front of them. We sit them in front of a computer screen, right? And we present different stimuli right on the screen. So what we can do to manipulate, right, the probability that certain things being presented is that over time, right, say within 100 trials within one block, we say if we want to present an orientation, different orientation, right, that span 360 degree. So what we can do is we can say, we are now going to present one orientation, for example, 20-degree orientation, more frequently than the rest. So for example, 80% of the time, right, the target presentation would be a 20-degree orientation, and then the rest would be presented a lot less frequently. And now after, we have participants kind of looking or performing a task in an environment that is biased, right, that is probabilistic, like the way we set up here, then we can look at different measures, right, taken from participants. And one thing we could do, right, so we could actually look at subjects' behavioral performance. So we can present different orientations on the screen, right? And then we can ask subjects to, for example, press either the left or the right button if they see certain things, right? So we can ask, if you think you see an orientation that is closer to a vertical versus horizontal orientation, then please press the left button versus the right button, for example, right? Another way of doing this is to have participants respond to the orientation they think they're seeing by moving a flight simulator joystick, right? And so, for example, in this case, it's a 360-degree flight simulator joystick. So we can ask them to match the orientation, right, of the joystick to the presented stimulus. And so this is one way, right, of kind of measuring the behavior or the decision making of subjects, right? So we can see if subjects perform better when the expected stimulus was presented, right? And that should be the case, because if they keep seeing the same thing, then it's likely that they're going to be very good at detecting it or reporting it, for example, right? Another way of kind of studying this process, right, is to have this cap, right, with electrodes on that we can put on the scalp of participants, and that's called electroencephalography or EEG, right? So it's non-invasive, right? So we can put these electrodes on and have participants perform the task, right? So while we're measuring the behavioral responses using joystick or button press, we can also at the same time, right, measure like the neural activity, right? The sum activity that is happening like in real time, right, as the subjects are performing the task. And so, right, and so this is actually a pretty cool technique because it's non-invasive, right? Like you can come in, you put the cap on, and at the end of it, you take the cap off and you go home, right? It's a pretty easy setup, right? And what's kind of unique about this tool or about the EEG is that it gives you, as I mentioned before, very high temporal resolution data, right? So you can kind of in real time see changes in the recorded, right, activities as different things are being presented on the screen, or as subjects are doing different things, like with even like if they are moving their eyes, right, or if they're moving their head, they shouldn't really be moving their head, right? We really care more about the process of things that are happening inside, right, in their brain. So essentially, we want to be able to kind of later take the data and see if we could see different kind of neural activities associated with, expected versus kind of unexpected stimulus, right? So if one stimulus is highly likely, would that induce different kind of neural responses in the brain or not, right? And what kind of temporal profiles, right, would you kind of see as a function of the likelihood of presentation of different stimuli? So we could look at that, right, with EEG, because EEG is very sensitive to the timing factor of presentation in activities. Another thing we can do is we can use this technique called electrocorticography or ECOG. So this is an invasive technique, right? So we can't actually like do this with anybody, right? So this is a method that usually, so you get this kind of data, right, from patients with epilepsy. So these patients go into the hospital, and as they are being monitored for seizures, right, they sometimes have research dedicated ECOG electrodes being implanted, right, on the surface or on the tissue of the brain. And this kind of electrodes or recordings could give very precise, like timing, right? Because you have the recording is very close to the neurons or the brain cells that you're recording from, right? And then the activities that you get, or the readouts that you get, are also very, you get a very precise spatial information as well. Like, if the electrode is kind of closer to like one region, you kind of can be sure that the recorded activity originated from the regions around it, right? As opposed to with EEG, because the electrodes are sitting on the skull, right? You can't tell for sure which brain structures kind of give rise to the recorded activities, right? But there are pros and cons for sure, right? Like you can't really put ECOG electrodes on anybody, right? But these are just samples of different ways of looking at like neural processes, for example, that underlie decision making, right? And another type of studies or techniques is we can also look at lesion studies, right? So one way of doing that, for example, what I'm showing here is that, there is a population of patients whose structure, the brain structure that's called hippocampus, that plays an important role in forming memory and also learning. So in San Diego, through the VA hospital and in UCSD, we have access to a population of patients who have lesions to their hippocampal regions, right? So these patients are memory impaired, right? Because without hippocampus, you can't really form new memories and learn, new like forming memories, essentially, right? And so if the question is whether this structure, whether this hippocampus is needed, right, for patients who actually encode the stimulus information or to learn about the stimulus statistics, then we can compare the patient's performance, right, on this task to control or like healthy population. And then we can ask, what aspects, right, of performance differs between the lesion patients and also the control population. And then finally, right, we can do something a little bit less experimental, right? So the last four kind of measures that I mentioned are all experimental. You actually have subjects coming in, right? And then you present a task to them, and you measure either their behavioral responses or their neural responses, right? Another way that we could do this, right, is we can just work with computational models. And one example shown here is a recurrent neural network model, or which is a class of artificial neural networks or machine learning, right? So what you can do is you can try to simulate, right, this task this task structure shown here, and then instead of giving it to human participants, we can actually show it to a model, right? And then we can kind of see how the model will learn the task and what kind of output it would give out over time. And then one important thing, right, that we can do with the models that we cannot really do with humans or other animals is that once the model, right, so you can see that in this model, for example, right, so there are a lot of different ways that you can do this, right, but in the example shown here, if you look inside the model, you see, red and blue dots, right? And some connections across different units. So this model was constructed based on having two types of neuron units, right? So the red ones are inhibitory units, and the red ones are excitatory units, and the blue ones are inhibitory units. And what that means is that if you're excitatory unit, then your connection to another node you will excite another node that you're connected to, right? On the other hand, inhibitory units will send out inhibitory signal and inhibit the activities of other nodes, essentially, right? So with this kind of architecture, right, we can start by saying, we randomize all the connections across different nodes, right? And then we show the task to the model. Then over time, we can kind of have the model, see different things, different presentation of the target. And over time, once the model has learned the environment or the stimulus statistics, then what we can do is we can break the model open, right? Like we can dissect the model and we can look at how the connectivity patterns, right, across different units change over time to allow the model to learn the task, right? So this is like a kind of like a unique thing that you can do with computational models that you are not able to do with other experimental methods, right? And so I want to mention that, right? So I'm really interested in, decision making in humans, right? And so I want to mention that these are the things that I have done, that I have been working on. And, to go back to all the people who have been supporting me, like all my mentors throughout, grad school. So I learned different techniques from different people. And together, right, like my network of my team and my network of mentors really, allow me to explore kind of different and use different diverse techniques to kind of look at this question of decision making, right? So if I were to just, work with one person, I might not know about another technique that I could use to look at a different kind of aspect, right, of this same question. So again, so this is actually my last slide, but I just want to mention that, right, like, there are so many ways of answering even the simplest question, right? And by talking to more people, right, or working with different people, you learn to look at the same question from diverse perspective, right? And having different viewpoints really help you rethink about your question and your methods. And it will help you kind of understand your question better, but also learn to ask slightly different questions and kind of, improve the quality of your research or the quality of your analysis going forward. So yes, I guess my final message would be that, teamwork is really important. And no matter who you are, right, you can contribute by bringing your diverse backgrounds or opinions to the table, and you can, help other people and your team, even though they are, they seem to know more than you, right? Of course, they don't know everything that you do. So you can always contribute something to the table and to the team. And I really highly encourage, anybody to give, right, to the community when you can through any mentorship and diversity efforts. So I can take any questions that you have about anything I presented, but thank you.
Thank you, Nuttida. Your story is so inspiring, and I can't wait to see what you do in the future. Speaking of the future, do you have anything that you would like to do?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah, so in terms of, science, I guess, so I really enjoy, right, like using different techniques and kind of combining them to answer like one question, right? So my immediate goals would be to continue to learn more about different computational methods or models that can help me. So, all the a lot of experimental data I have already collected, right, throughout grad school, and also, my first year of a postdoc at the Salk. So going forward, right, I would like to learn more about the computational models that might help me understand the already collected data better, right? So like with the models, you might like, by combining different models with the data, you might be able to see different things that you were not able to kind of see before. So that's my kind of science goal. And in terms of, efforts or like service or kind of mentorship and diversity efforts. So I'm really like deeply committed to, kind of like mentorship efforts, because that helped me a lot, right? From from middle school throughout grad school and even now. And I would really like to kind of so I usually mentor some high school students, but mostly undergraduate students, right, throughout different programs at UCSD. So I am looking forward to continue to contribute to mentoring efforts, especially for hopefully younger and younger students, because I think it's really important that to like I feel like I learned a lot. So for the past couple of years, I feel like my projects, or like the summers that I work with like middle school or high school students, are very rewarding, right? Because they ask questions that I have not thought about for a long time. And I really enjoy kind of learning from diverse perspectives from different group of people. Yeah.
Great. Another question, if you're willing to take it. Apart from neuroscience, are there any other like STEM areas that you're really interested in?
Yeah. So that's a great question. So during college, I did double majors in neuroscience and math, right? Because my thinking was that math is universal. Like I wouldn't really need English to know math, right? And I took a lot of math classes in high school in Thailand, and I felt like that would be kind of my like comfort zone, right? And that was actually somewhat true to to some extent. And once you kind of start taking kind of advanced math classes, you actually do need to write proof and things like that, and you do need a lot of English. But yeah, that I guess math is or has been something that I'm interested in, right? And in my research, I am trying to bring math in when I can, right? So computational modeling is highly kind of dependent on a lot of mathematical understandings, right? Or like theories. And so I guess apart from like experimental neuroscience, I'm really interested in like computational tools and mathematical kind of like understandings or theories. Yeah.
All right, thank you. So I think that's it for my questions.
Sounds good. Is there anything else, or are we all set?
I think we should be all set. So yeah.
Okay.
Once again, thank you for your awesome presentation and for answering my questions.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me, and
Thank
looking
you.
forward to maybe, work with you in the future.
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay. Thank you so much. So I will,
Yeah.
okay, so I stop.